What if you could lead more effectively and go home on time? Welcome to the Lightbulb. I'm Zoe Thompson, leadership and performance coach, and each week I bring you 3 practical insights from my work helping impact-driven leaders transform from reactive to intentional leadership so they can finish work on time and take guilt-free time off, creating success that feels as good as it looks. Let's jump in. Welcome back, episode 7, and I am recording this on a Sunday morning, slight morning voice today, looking out at blue sky despite it raining pretty heavily overnight, but we're all good. I've got a coffee. I have my 3 light bulbs to talk about, and yeah, it's been an interesting week this week. Some really good client sessions. And actually, it's been interesting to look at what's been coming up in the sessions and see where the overlaps are so that I can work out what my light bulbs to talk about this week are. First one, communication adaptation. This has come up in 2 different ways this week. One around verbal communication and one around written communication. And the common theme between the two, by one size fits all leadership, doesn't work and creates friction. Interestingly, a big part of the conversation with clients this week, especially talking about communication, is how we hold on to being authentic in our approach, but also being able to adapt that approach to meet the needs of the person that we're talking with or communicating with, whether that's verbal or in writing. One of the sessions this week, we were talking about a communication style, especially when we're working with somebody who has a different communication style to us. And one of the models that we talked through was the DISC model. Now, you might have seen this before if you search up DISC online. For those of you who haven't seen it, if you have a look at DISC online, there are plenty of graphics and images. There used to be a free assessment tool. That's the one that I was using has now gone, and I haven't been able to find a replacement one. I know organizations, individuals can pay for an assessment. I would say when you look at the model, you'll probably understand and spot yourself quite quickly. And you will also be able to look at who you work with, who is on your team, and probably work out which color, which part of the DISC model they represent. Anyway, the client this week was talking about preparing for a meeting with a colleague, but we were also talking about how this shows up in meetings with peers and with those who are senior as well, and how we see these different communication styles, different personality types come to play when we're in that group environment as well as in one-to-one conversations. And we were talking about how to adjust the approach to match who's in the room and how that conversation is going. Interestingly, when we were talking about this, we were talking about how quite often, historically, a lot of leaders have been red. They've been dominant driver personalities and also compliant personality types too. And in a meeting, how this shows up. But actually what we're seeing is a lot more leaders with the green and yellow approaches coming through, so much slower pace, holding space for that reflection. So the DISC model, if you think about the 2 axes, you've got on the horizontal axis, you've got task focus and people focus. And then on the vertical axis, you've got slower pace, more reflective, and faster pace. So within those quadrants, you've got people who are task or people focused, slower pace, faster pace. So this shows up in meetings. And when you've got all 4 personality types around the table, it definitely makes for an interesting conversation. And we need all 4 personality types around the table because we need people to be faster paced, task focused. We need people to be more reflective and people focused. That helps us to look at all the different perspectives when we're in these discussions, when we're in meetings where decisions need to be made. And we need to allow that space for all of those different approaches to come through. Now, in the client session this week, we were talking about how to stay authentic and then be able to adapt different styles of communication, different approaches in those different environments when you're with different people. And we were talking about layering that and aligning that. And I thought it was a really great way that the client explained how they wanted to approach it moving forward, having seen the model. So go with your own approach and then layer it with the different approaches that meet the needs of the different people in the room and aligning that communication with what is needed. So our natural communication style works really well for us. And for some people who have a very similar communication style, it's going to work for them too. We need to remember that there will also be other people in the room that have a different communication style. They're going to need more time to reflect. They're going to need a different focus. They're going to need the information cascaded in a different way. So we want to be able to layer our styles of communication so that we meet the needs of everybody in the room. So when we go into these meetings, when we're preparing for the meetings or conversations that we're having, we need to think about who we are going to be talking with when we go in and how we can adapt our approach and our communication style to meet their needs. Now, a common mistake is trying to bring everyone into our communication style rather than adapting to theirs. And what I see from people who are really good leaders are able to do this really well. This is a learned behavior. This is something we can practice. We can practice approaching things in a different way. We can practice communicating things in a different way and meet the needs of the individuals that we are talking with, the collective. But even with a collective, there are still individuals. So we need to think about how we can adapt that communication style so that everybody in the room hears that message in the way that we intended. So if we're communicating the same way with everyone on the team, some people are just not going to get it. The information is just not going to land with them. The problem isn't them, it's that we're not adapting that approach. The more we can flex and adapt our communication, we can layer and align the communication for all the different personality types, all the different communication types in the room without losing the authentic voice. Our authentic voice. And this kind of leads into the second light bulb. And so while this one talks about the verbal communication, we also need to think about the written communication. So first light bulb talking very much about how we communicate in a way that makes sure that our message is understood. This second light bulb is more around that level of understanding so that when we're giving instructions, when we're delegating, when we're giving out the work, that we get the outcome that we are expecting, that we manage our expectations, also that we're able to give that clarity so that people aren't coming backwards and forwards. We want to try and reduce the amount of time that people come back to us with questions, that people come back to us with problems that they're looking to solve. So the second light bulb is very much around giving verbal instructions rather than the first light bulb, which is more around two-way communication in a meeting environment. So we need to remember that everyone remembers conversations very differently. So we want to make sure that firstly, we have a very clear conversation, linking back into that first point. We also want to make sure that we give enough information in a way that we can check in that the person is receiving that information and that when they go off to do that work, they're going to do the work as we're expecting them to. What we also want to do is reduce the number of additional questions and make sure they're in a place where they are good to go and ready to go off and do it. So one of the conversations we had this week was around how we can put something in place. So create a process, create a system that is almost a template of the work that we often give out. So we're identifying what work do we often give out. So say, for example, project work. If we are often delegating projects or delegating elements of a project, what conversations are we having frequently? And how can we put a template in place so that we've got a system and a process that helps us to remember everything that we need to give them, but also helps them to get familiar with the system. So it might be the scope, it might be the key objectives, it might be some guiding points for them to consider. It may also be the approach that you want them to take. So having a template, having a system in place will help, firstly, you to not have to think, right, okay, what else do I need to tell them? But also for them to walk away after the conversation with something in writing that will help them to work that through. We talked about this on the Blueprint program a couple of weeks ago with a manager who does checks in with their team, their standard checks, legally required checks. There's certain things they know they have to check every single time. So creating a template that helps them to remember what needs to be looked at, and then a template that they can then give the team to follow up on those checks helps reduce the decisions that need to be made. It helps reduce that decision-making fatigue. So again, that system, that process will really help with making sure that the verbal conversations that we have are followed up in writing. Another client this week, we were talking about written communication and helping us to get a response that we're looking for on the emails. So again, that back and forth with questions and requests for clarification or misunderstanding, that can take up a lot of our time. So the more we can think about in our initial email, what does the other person need to know? How can we lead them through the email with the information, but also that call to action at the end, making sure that's really clear and not open-ended. We want to be able to almost hand them how to close the loop of that email. So we want to make sure we get a response to that email, but we also want to make sure that the call to action is very, very clear and reduce their time needed to be able to take action. So I don't know about you, but I know certainly for me with my emails, if it looks like it's going to take longer than 2 minutes, I often create a task and then I'll schedule in the time to do that. So if we can close those emails with really clear instructions that helps them to take action very, very quickly, we are more likely to get a response. So we don't want to leave it too open, and we also don't want to not include information that they need, that they then need to come back and ask more questions. Open-ended emails often are going to get deprioritized. If it says, let me know your thoughts, there's no urgency around it. Let me know your thoughts is pretty open-ended, and it's also, it's pretty passive. So it doesn't create any sense of urgency. We want to make sure that we give them a timescale of when we need a response by, so clear deadlines, but also what response we're looking for. Being able to give them an indication that this is going to take 2 minutes of their time or less, that they can take action on this and get it off their list. In the same way that we work, we want to clear our emails down. We want to be able to take action and get it off our list. So help them to be able to do that. Now, both of these are clarity problems. Both of these are challenges where we are not clear enough up front to help the information land so that the action can be taken. When we don't do that, we're creating unnecessary back and forth. It creates a delay. We don't want to be having things held on our to-do list because we're waiting for a response. We want to be able to get that response as quickly as possible so that we can close that loop and take it off of our list. It drains energy. And actually, a lot of this is preventable. So the more we can front load the clarity, front load the information, front load a very clear call to action, the more we're going to be able to work more efficiently and more effectively. So if your team isn't delivering what you want, or people aren't responding, have a look at how you are communicating, check your clarity. The verbal conversations, briefs, open-ended requests, you're probably going to get misaligned actions. You're going to get responses you're not looking for. And it's not because they're not capable. It's just that we haven't been clear enough up front. So the more we can front load the clarity, the more we're managing that preventable confusion and reducing the time. Okay. Third light bulb, from default to design. How do you catch yourself before that reactive mode takes over? I've been talking this week, it's been International Leadership Week. So we've been talking about reinventing leadership. That's the theme for International Leadership Week. I've done 5 posts on LinkedIn. Check them out if you haven't seen them. 5 posts this week on reinventing leadership. And one of the posts that I put up was how most leaders don't actually choose how they lead, default into reactive patterns. So quite often the first role that we go into in leadership will shape how we lead. And we need to increase our awareness of that because every role that we go into is probably going to need a different style of leadership. And we want to make sure that our style of leadership is intentional rather than reactive. The more intentional we are in our leadership, the more we are making sure that the leadership that we are showing is the leadership that is needed. So how do you catch yourself in the moment before that default mode takes over? So here's some examples. So you open your inbox first thing and then you're letting email dictate your day. You say yes automatically without checking your priorities or capacity. You're working in the evenings because all day you're literally just responding to everybody else. The only time you get to work on your to-do list is evenings and weekends. And you're jumping straight into problem solving when your team comes to you because it's quick and it's easy. It's an easy fix. It's actually creating the longer term problem. This is the challenge for you to think about what worked at a previous level. Being responsive, jumping in, being the go-to person, being the problem solver is now going to create a bottleneck. The more you go into those more senior positions, the more you are creating a team of problem solvers, the more you are dictating what needs to be done that day, setting your priorities. So pausing before you take action will help you to recognize where that pattern is and help you to recognize what those trigger moments are. Where are you noticing that there's an automatic response coming in that is no longer helpful? That's what you're trying to catch. So those 4 Ps, pause, prioritize, then proceed with purpose will make a huge difference. Checking in at the beginning of every day. What is on my to-do list today? What are my ascend activities that need to be done? Those tasks that are going to drive everything forward and drive the team forward and delivery forward. What are my anchor tasks? The ones that need to be done to keep the momentum going. And what's on my list for today that I can avoid and give myself some time and energy back. When we get into the pattern of doing the AAA time framework every morning, setting ourselves up for the day, and then using the 4 Ps throughout the day, we're able to use it in real time. So that's going to help you to catch when you are potentially stepping into people pleasing rather than leading. Catching yourself being apologetic rather than authoritative. That belief work, that shifting that belief in how you want to lead, the leader who you've been versus the leader who you are and the one that you're becoming, shifting those beliefs into how you want to show up so that it's not an unconscious default, it's a conscious choice. Every time you catch yourself, it's an indication you are moving in the right direction. Remember, your brain is a muscle, and the more you practice, the more this becomes permanent. So if you recognize that you are reactive now, have a look at those default patterns that aren't serving you. Look at where you recognize these are happening so that you can predict where it might happen to catch yourself in the moment. And look for where those specific triggers are, those cues that you know are happening, and have a look to see what framework is going to help you. Is it the AAA framework being more preventative? Is it the Ps that help you in that moment when you're reacting to be more intentional? Right. That's my 3 light bulbs. It's a little bit longer for this episode, but I think there's lots of very practical things to think about in there. I'm going to leave it there. I have a cake in the oven that the timer is about to go off, so that's definitely a sign for me to wrap things up for this episode. Have a fantastic week ahead, stay intentional, and I will see you next week for the next episode. And those are your 3 takeaways for this week. Before you go, ask yourself, what's my light bulb moment from this? And now that I know what I know, what will I do differently? Choose one action, however small, and commit to it. That's how overwhelmed and reactive becomes aligned and intentional. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week on the next episode of The Lightbulb.